Hello 3D printing peeps. I'm sitting next to the SOVOL SV02 and today we are going to deal with the heat block situation. Of course, I'm talking about the fact that the heat block is not the typical size, making it impossible to find a compatible silicone boot, as well as making it difficult to find and buy the correct nozzles. To tackle that, we are going to swap out the heater block for a Micro Swiss MK8 heater block intended for a Creality printer. This little Micro Swiss kit contains a heater block and a silicone sock that will make your SOVOL SV02 compatible with standard Creality Silicon Socks, and more importantly, a full lineup of easy to obtain Creality or Creality compatible nozzles. To get started, we're going to move this nozzle over and use our firmware to raise it up a bunch. Now that it's nice and high, we are going to remove the heater block. To do that, we are going to go ahead and remove this fan cover. You can use the Allen keys that come with most 3D printers, or you can use a fancy tool like me. Once the screws are out, just take this and carefully move it aside. You won't be able to move it very far because it is attached to its heating coil and thermistor, which we are going to remove right now. The heat block won't come out easily. Just warm it up some by choosing to preheat your nozzle, and your heat block will loosen up and come right out. You'll also notice my thermistor came right out with it as well. So please avoid yanking and pulling on these very delicate wires. If they don't come out, choose preheat your nozzle, and then before you actually remove them, turn the printer off to avoid shorting anything, and then gently remove them. You might be expecting to find little grub screws underneath here, but that is not the case. The heat block is screwed into place. Now that the heat tube and the thermistor are out, you can move this whole hot end out of the way behind the printer. And look at that awesome access to the heat block. Go ahead and take your tool of choice. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. And there you have it. Your garbage stock SV02 heat block and nozzle are no more. We'll now take our shiny new Micro Swiss heat block and simply screw it into place. You may notice that this heat block does smack into that mount. All you need to do is loosen up these two screws right here, and that will allow you to easily move this out of the way and continue tightening this heat block. You can then go back up and just snug up that nozzle again. You'll notice that the holes on mine are facing forward instead of off to the side. That's fine. We are going to install it this way. We are going to go ahead and get some thermal paste and put it on that heat tube. And I'm going to put a touch of thermal paste on the thermistor. Whether or not you think the thermal paste is needed, it will help in the installation and future removal of this heat tube. Go ahead and slide the tube into the heat block and stick the thermistor into the little hole. And screw it in gently. You may have trouble getting the screw between the wire. If that's the case, take the wire out, work the screw between the wire first, and then guide it into the hole. Do not over tighten this, you will break it, just make it firm. And this is where things differ a little bit from the original heat block. To secure the heat tube, you'll tighten these two little grubs underneath. Check to make sure it stays put and you're good. Now that everything's in place, put your wrench over the heat block and finish tightening it. Back to where it was when you started. Now it's time to put the nozzle on. You can use a standard MK-ST Creality nozzle. I am going to use an MK-HF high flow nozzle. It is a good idea to warm the heat block before putting the nozzle in. So go ahead and warm up the heat block using the preheat option in your firmware, and then install your nozzle. Only give it a few screws with your fingers because it will become hot very quickly. Once it's fully warmed up, I am going to turn it off for safety. I am going to hold the heat block in place, and I am going to use a 6mm socket to finish snugging up the nozzle. You can use a wrench or the wrench tool that came with your printer. Please do not over tighten, just snug it up. Now that the nozzle is in place, you are going to take that silicone boot or silicone sock and put it on. Notice that the slot is open on the side of the wiring. Push the nozzle through the hole and clip the boot up over the heat block. Be careful, it may still be hot. And there you have it. We've replaced the heat block and the nozzle, and it's time to put the fan cover back on and be done. Just go ahead and put this cover back on the same way you took it off. All right, there is our new fancy heat block with the silicone sock and the nozzle. Because it is a different heat block and nozzle, we are going to have to check our Z offset before we print with this thing. I am going to use the first layer of a print to baby step my Z to where I want it. If you want to use this method, I would raise your Z offset a millimeter or two before the print starts to avoid digging into the glass. I would rather start with the Z too high, which is harmless, than the Z too low, which can ruin your bed. If you're going to adjust your Z offset live while doing a print, I suggest printing slowly and using something with a skirt. A skirt is the perfect opportunity to set your Z offset. If you fail to get it perfectly adjusted during the skirt, you should at least have it close, and then you can use the first layer of the print to finish dialing it in. That said, I am testing with a print that does not have a skirt, and we will be using the first layer to dial in that Z. To get started, I am going to spray my bed with IPA and wipe it down with Scott's blue shop towels. If you're somebody that likes a little help, I use a number 4 hole Tresemme. Hairspray is a really great additive for 3D printing. It adds a nice tack to the bed, and on your next print you can simply spray the bed down, wipe it again, and it'll evaporate, and that hairspray tack will return and be nice and evenly spread to hold your next print as well. Okay, here we go. Just a reminder, if you are adjusting your Z offset live like this, please set the current Z offset to about 2 millimeters higher. If it's not printing, it's too low and it's kind of rubbing against the glass, you're going to raise your Z offset. If it's too high and it's just stringing the filament along, you're going to lower your Z offset. So, because we're doing a dual color print, my machine just did the purge tower, and now it's starting its first line. I'm going to rub it. If it moves out of the way when I rub it, my Z offset's too high. If it's not sticking and it's just dragging around, my Z offset's too high. If it stays put when I rub it, then it's good. I'm going to leave it there. As you can see, I can rub it good and it's not moving. As it printed, I continued to work in that Z offset. Here are the early layers. You'll see how rough they are. That's because the Z offset is too close, so it's really rough. As it moved over, I raised my Z a little bit at a time, and watched the layers print until finally I've got my magic number just right, and you can see how nice and smooth the final layers there are. You could go ahead and cancel this print and restart it with the proper Z offset, or you can let it continue, and you'll see that that second layer is so much better. That's actually covering the rough layer with a nice smooth layer thanks to that properly dialed in Z offset. Printing beautifully, and this is our very first use of the new heat block and the new nozzle. And there you have it. We have successfully replaced the stock SOVOL SV02 heat block and nozzle with a Micro Swiss Creality compatible heat block and a Creality nozzle. I installed the hardened copper HK-HF high flow nozzle, but you can use a standard brass HK-ST nozzle, as you probably already use in most of your Ender printers. As you can see, my very first test print was a smashing success, and printed this really awesome 3D rundown plaque. This is black PLA Plus and silk silver PLA Plus. You are on the 3D Rundown YouTube channel. I'm Greg Adventure, your instructor on 3drundown.com, and replacing the SOVOL heat block and nozzle with the Micro Swiss Creality compatible heat block and nozzle was today's adventure.